I think so, yeah. I mean, it's setting people up for failure, right?
Yeah.
Because then they feel like it's their body's the problem, right? If because look, it's like if because it becomes a simple math problem, right? Let's just say this hypothesis, and it's just a hypothesis. Let's just throw that out there. This isn't like, you know, the law of gravity. Like you can't deny that if I hold this book up and drop it, it's going to drop. Like there is undisputable. But this energy balance model or hypothesis, it's not like it's confirmed by science or, there is some metabolic reward feeding studies that have looked at this, but there's variables and caveats. And I think we kind of plug in, we talk about obesity as though it's a singular term, right? People are overweight. There's many different ways that people can become overweight, right? I can give you prednisone. I can give Jason insulin. His body composition will change. I can also overfeed Jason in, just food. His body composition will change. I can give you antibiotics and change your microbiome. You can eat the same foods, your body composition will change. I can have you do the same foods and exercise and just deprive you of sleep. Your body composition will change, right? So the point is, there's no one singular overweight. There's multiple roads, when they say multiple roads to Rome kind of thing. So there's many different ways to go about this. And if you just say it's just the calorie, then, well, what about the sleep? What about the stress management? What about the emotional connection to food? What about the physical activity? What about the hormones? What about the microbiome? What about all these things? So it's not that simple.
Hey, what's up, guys? My name's Jason Dames. I'm with Final Start Fitness. And hey, we got a special guest on our program today. I'm really excited to have Mike Mutzel. I like to refer to him as Mike Muscle.
I don't know about that. I mean, look, you got way bigger arms than me, but no.
No, but guys, like I really, if any of you have followed me, you know that I'm like always, forwarding his YouTube channel videos and all kinds of stuff. Like he's interviewed some of the top people in the health and fitness industry, everybody from like Thomas DeLauer, Dr. Perlmutter, Ben Pakulski. These are a lot of guys that I really highly respect, and Mike's channel is just amazing. I've learned so much. So it's really a privilege to have you on.
Hey man,
so
thanks for coming to my house. Really great to
I really appreciate it. It's been cool just hanging out and like seeing the family and just real down to earth, authentic people. And so I
appreciate it, bud.
I really
Jason yesterday, I mean, he was helping me with the house. We were putting up siding.
Heck yeah, man.
Shoveling rocks. I mean, we done all kinds of fun stuff.
I wish we could have got it on video to share. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And that's what's cool is Mike's always like, got little things going, and it's really cool to see how he's kind of like you do a good job at multitasking and doing a really good job. It's really cool seeing like you're being so productive and stuff. So he really lives what he preaches.
Hey, I appreciate it, man.
So so we wanted to take a little deep dive into, you've been studying a lot of autophagy and this whole calories in and calories out model, and what its effects on the as far as your physiology is concerned. I'd love to talk about like this whole calories in and calories out model, and some of the stuff that you've been researching. Before we do that though, I want to kind of set the stage, because one of the things I love about his channel is Mike is always looking at like context and variables, and there's this concept he always talks about called confirmation bias. And to set the stage up, I think it's important to think, I think the older I get, the more I realize like a lot of the things I used to think are a little bit different than what they used to be.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get so like locked into like this particular way of thinking, and we look for other things to support that. So would you mind starting off, maybe talking a little bit about that, and we'll talk about the calories in and calories out stuff.
Yeah, I would love to. I think it's just important that we all kind of are aware of this idea that the human mind is we're so biased. We're biased creatures, and this happens to the best of us, right? And so I'm not an expert in this mindset area, but I've just read a lot of books about this, and there's the book that comes to mind, the book Decisive by the Heath brothers, Dan and Chip Heath. They also wrote They've written Switch. There's a few other books that I'm drawing a blank on right now. But anyway, they talk about how we make decisions and everything. So most people, including yourselves watching this video, we actively seek out more information to confirm what we already believe, right? So a lot of us, like you got this book, you see this book titled, Belly Fat Effect, right? So people are interested in losing fat, so they want to just confirm, like, it's calories in, calories out, or it's a microbiome, or it's keto, right? We're trying to always confirm our biases. And so what I like to do is, I think it's a good exercise for all people, is to challenge our beliefs, right? So if you're a right-wing conservative, well, why don't you just read some liberal, left-wing stuff and just kind of see where they're coming from? Because how could two people have totally different perspectives? Could it be that there's different vantage points that they're coming from, different things that we haven't thought about before? And so that's kind of this confirmation bias. Is we need to understand that we're always trying to confirm what we already know. So we need to take a step back. And so I do this all the time because I share a lot of ketogenic, intermittent fasting type research, as you know, and I'm quick to, like, when I read a study, for example, a new study comes out saying intermittent fasting is good for reducing waist circumference and belly fat, right? So I'm like, oh, I got to do an Instagram post. And I'm like, all right, chill out, hold up. Let's just take a step back and, like, really look at this from a critical perspective. Was it a well-designed study? Did they have a control group, right? Because I know people are going to try and poke holes in it, right? Because, in our fitness space, in nutrition, there's this paradigm. Well, it's all about energy balance. The only way that human beings can lose body fat is to be in a calorie deficit. Like, there's really smart people, PhDs, MDs, and all, they firmly believe that. And they kind of say, well, the quality of the food doesn't really matter. Your hormones, it doesn't really matter as long as you're in a calorie deficit. And there's people like you and I who are like, look, man, we've had clients that have been in a calorie deficit that are gaining fat. So either they're all liars, and it's like, I don't, because I think you and I have talked about this before, but, I was a trainer as well, and was doing nutrition coaching and all that. And how I kind of got into the whole microbiome and this whole different way of thinking is I was, at a medical clinic working with a Gerard Guillory family practice internal medicine doc, and this overweight medical assistant got bariatric surgery. But she didn't change her diet yet. She was eating this, maybe smaller quantities, but the weight was just, she was rapidly shedding body fat, right? So I was like, wow, that's crazy. How does manipulating her gut affect the rapid, like, how does that cause weight loss? And then a lot of the clients I was meeting with had way bigger, they were overweight, right? Yeah. And I was eating more than them, that they were carrying on all this. And I'm like, so I thought, at first I thought, oh, they're lying to me. But then after hundreds of people, I'm like, it's the probability of all these people being liars and paying money to see me seems improbable. Anyway, so I kind of got off the topic there, but so there's two different perspectives, right? And so what I like to do is just share with people that it's probably a mix of both. There's probably some truth in both conservative political thought and liberal political thought, right? There's definitely some truth in metabolism. You can't really lose a lot of body fat if you're chronically in an energy surplus, right? But it doesn't mean that the energy surplus or energy deficit is the sine qua non or the only thing that governs whether or not we're going to, have body fat or be able to burn it. There's other factors going on. So anyway, I hope I'm answering your question a little bit.
No, that's great. And I think it's perfect because like what you said with the truth is, I completely agree, and I think a lot of it you talk about it is really context. You talk about these variables all the time, like, well, what's the health of your microbiome? How insulin sensitive are you? What's your digestion look like?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times you'll see these different reports or studies that come out that, confirm something, but maybe it's leaving out particular parts of the context that may not be true in that particular circumstance. Or vice versa, and so that's why I wanted to set the stage because, and he's talking about calories in and calories out, so I think it's a good segue. But this mindset that the idea of it's just about energy balance, like calories in and calories out, how it may lead to a lot of different like eating problems and just maybe setting people up for failure in a way. Like I was the same way. I'd be working with these clients and not be able to get anywhere, and I'm like, there has to be something more going on here. And a lot of fitness trainers will be like, or people in the fitness world would be like, well, it's all your fault. You're not doing something right?
And that's self-defeating. I mean, it's not a good attitude.
No.
But I think it's a nice base point for people to start from to get an idea of like, okay, where are my macronutrients? How much protein am I getting? How much carbs? How much fat? All that. Like, where is my energy balance in relationship to my energy expenditure? So I think it's good to a certain level.
Yeah.
But if people just here's the fallacy of this, right? So let's say I put on 50 pounds, right? So I'm like 185 pounds. I get up to 230 something, right? Let's just say hypothetically. So my resting metabolic rate is actually going to increase. So this is what's a lot of people have this perception that they have a slow, sluggish metabolism, but they're just not really good fat burners in reality. So the more you weigh, the faster your metabolic rate is at rest. The more weight you lose, the slower your metabolic rate. It's just a metabolic adaptation.
So interesting.
So check this out, right? So let's say, okay, I'm overweight, so I'm going to start dieting, right? So as I start dieting, guess what happens to my metabolism? As I lose weight, my metabolism slows. So it just creates this thing where you're going to have to diet harder and harder and harder. So if someone has 100 pounds to lose, when they lose that 100 pounds, not only are they're going to have to eat so much less food, and then their metabolism's going to slow.
Oh my
and
gosh.
you know what I mean? So
Okay.
it creates this situation where it's unsustainable. And so then if you actually look at the long-term outcomes, the Biggest Loser follow-up study,
Yeah.
for example. So they tracked Johns Hopkins University, or scientists affiliated with Johns Hopkins and funded by the National Institutes of Health followed these Biggest Loser individuals. Because you've never seen a Biggest Loser follow-up, right?
Yeah.
You see these people,
Right.
it's whatever,
Like,
12 weeks.
There's no reunion.
There's no reunion, man, because these people, their resting metabolic rate is so suppressed. And then here's what's crazy about that is even though they've regained like majority of the weight lost, I can't remember the exact percentages, but it's something along the lines of 80% of people that lost all that weight regained majority of the weight. So they regained it, but their metabolic rate is still suppressed 6 years later.
Jeez.
So that's the thing.
And that's despite like still eating low amounts of calories and exercise, right? Because
That's-
weren't a lot of these that are still like eating low calorie diets?
Exactly, man. So you're like, so even if this whole model of like calories in, calories out is like someone's telling you that, you need to keep in mind that it's not sustainable long term. Like it might work in the short term, but then other methodologies to approach fat loss, like time-restricted feeding or intermittent fasting, carb cycling, these different things, they don't seem to have that suppressive effect on your resting metabolic rate in the long term. And I know you have some follow-up questions, so I'll just leave you all with one more kind of tip. There was a study at University of Colorado. Actually, where I did a lot of my research for this book, Belly Fat Effect,
Yeah.
incidentally.
Okay.
So the medical center there, I spent a lot of time in that medical school library. They did a really cool study where they had individuals do intermittent fasting, which the calorie counting folks say the only way intermittent fasting works is because you're in a calorie deficit.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they had this intermittent fasting, and if we just to define that, just for sake of clarity,
That would be great.
this kind of, you're eating probably the same amount of maintenance calories, just in a confined period of time that's constricted versus, the calories in, calories out folks say it doesn't really matter when you eat as long as you're in a deficit, right? So you can eat all your meals at midnight and then go to bed and it doesn't matter for fat loss, right? And we now know that circadian rhythms and all this, so our body is influenced by time, right? By sun exposure, by light exposure. This is why men should wake up with an erection, right?
Yeah.
Morning wood. This is part of testosterone oscillates on a circadian rhythm. This is why women menstruate at predictable times. So, long story short, going back to this study, so they had individuals just eat basically a low-calorie diet, but eat whenever they wanted, right? So they could eat 6 meals a day, 2 meals a day, whatever. Then they had individuals say, hey, look, you can only eat during this window period of time. So this was only an 8-week study.
Yeah.
So good, it was good control. They had two different arms of the study. And they followed people at the end of 8 weeks, but then 32 weeks later, they retested their body composition, lean muscle mass, fat mass, and everything. And check it, this is what's really interesting. So although the calorie deficit was actually greater in the group that did the intermittent fasting, they didn't lose as much fat as they probably should have given the calorie deficit.
Yeah.
So the researchers were like, wait, hold up. Like if this is all about calories, the intermittent fasting group should have lost way more body fat, but it was actually very similar to the low calorie diet group. But the big point that I want to emphasize for everyone watching is important is the body composition 32 weeks after the 8-week
Maintain.
study. So yeah, so the intermittent fasting people actually continued to burn body fat and build muscle mass, whereas the people that did the diet, they continued to lose muscle and then they regained a lot more fat mass.
Yeah.
So it goes back to kind of what we were saying is like how you approach your diet or feeding pattern actually affects your body composition long term, which I think is more important, right?
Right.
It's not like, okay, I know people have a wedding or a this or that coming up where they want to look good, a beach vacation, but it's like you want to approach this so that it's sustainable long term.
Yeah.
I mean, what if I told someone like, look, I know you got your student loans, you got to pay off. So we can pay those off, but then, you know, they're going to be paid off, but then, you know, in 6 months, you're going to have more debt, right? And then plus, you know, the interest rate's going to increase. That wouldn't be a good plan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you want something that's sustainable long term as opposed, you can't rob Peter to pay Paul and then keep doing that, you know? And I think the clients you work with, the people I've worked with, that's where they're at. They're like, I've done all this and I'm struggling, man. What do I do now? So
that's such a great point. And because like in your book, and I love your little analogies you give, and you refer to like being in debt and so forth. In his book, this book helped me like really connect a lot of dots. Like it was really helpful in terms of like inflammation and stuff. But you were talking in there about metabolic flexibility, you know. And if you only have like, you can only pay in one source of payment, like a credit card or whatever, and that's all you have, you're going to be limited on what you can do. Same is true metabolically. You know, if you have a lot of digestive issues, you have inflammation, you have these other things going on, it's really going to it's going to impact your hormones, which is going to impact if you store fat or where you burn fat, right?
totally. Yeah, you know, a lot of us, I mean, it's a pretty cool analogy, you know, like we've all been on vacation, right? Or this happens sometimes. Like I use American Express. I just like their point system and everything like that. But you go to a small coffee shop and they don't take American Express or something like that. Or imagine if you went to a coffee shop or your grocery store and they're like, oh, sorry, we only accept cash here. You'd be like, who has cash anymore? A lot of people have Apple Pay on their phone and all that. But a lot of us, our bodies are kind of locked into only spending one energy system or you know, being responsive to one energy system. And for most people, it's just burning sugar, right? And burning really not necessarily just sugar, but carbohydrate-based metabolism. And so their body is inflexible metabolically. And that's why they have a lot of issues. And if we look at, you know, from just obesity, type 2 diabetes, which coincides with obesity, autoimmunity, a lot of women nowadays have Hashimoto's, multiple sclerosis, various autoimmune conditions. And a lot of people think, and you kind of hit it on it about the book, is, well, these autoimmune conditions, that's just the immune system's problem. But if we look at problems within the immune system, even allergies, food sensitivities, these have an underlying metabolic element to them. And there's some insulin resistance and just favoring of, you know, metabolic inflexibility, just burning the carbohydrates. And so by exercising more, by compressing your feeding pattern, intermittent fasting, hey, Buckley, could you be a little bit more quiet? We got my daughter here is working on some artwork. Just wanted to be quiet for you guys.
We love kids, so.
Just didn't want too much background noise. So basically, long story short, a lot of us don't have the sluggish metabolism. Our metabolism for most people is actually it's relatively high. We're just burning the wrong substrate.
Yeah.
Just like a grocery store, you wouldn't frequent a grocery store that only took cash, you know, unless you didn't have a credit card, but most people have credit cards, right? You want that ability to pick and choose fuel sources. And so now here's just an at-home test people can do. Very simple. If you go without food for 12, 14, 16 hours and you start to get hungry and shaky, you're like only spending cash in your body. You need to be able to pivot to be able to use different fuel sources and utilize fat for fuel. So that shakiness, a jittery, that's your body saying, oh my gosh, we don't have enough fats, we don't have enough ketones to fuel the brain. So it's like you're hitting the fire alarm essentially, causing your adrenals to upregulate these so-called counter-regulatory hormones, adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, growth hormone. Now, these can be helpful, obviously, for making us, you know, kind of recreate, you know, fuel substrates and increase ketone synthesis. But if you're not used to it, the amplitude is amplified, so it's uncomfortable for some people. So if you get hangry or if you get really shaky, if you don't get enough food or don't.
That was me, by the way. Like,
Oh, yeah,
back
me
in the
too.
day,
Yeah.
like when I did, eating 8 times a day, every 3 hours, I could tell you what time it was just from my stomach. I'd get
Yeah.
a low blood sugar drop because I was primarily fueling my body with sugar.
Yep. I mean, me too. Same thing, right? So that's the thing. So we've learned from our mistakes, and that's why we're here sharing this with
Yeah.
other people. It's now you've eaten nothing today.
No, yeah, just coffee. That's
Yeah.
pretty much it. And I feel great. Like that's one of the biggest things when I started learning more about fat metabolism and kind of introducing the ketogenic diet. I just realized how satiated I was, and I felt calmer. It just was a lot of freedom for me. Not to mention the other health benefits that you get from ketones. But
Right. Yeah, the mental clarity,
Oh
all
my
that.
gosh.
I mean, so just a little small tip, because a lot of, average people think that, man, if you don't have glucose, if you don't have bread for breakfast and orange juice, your brain's not going to work. But, the brain actually, and this is debatable about the preferred fuel source in the body. A lot of people think that, well, your brain only utilizes carbohydrates, but your brain can rapidly utilize ketones as a fuel source for fat. So long story short, not to get too complex into the biochemistry, but your brain can't directly oxidize fats for fuel. It kind of needs to absorb them through the blood-brain barrier in the form of ketones. And ketones are basically two fatty acids kind of joined together. And so then there's enzymes that will split them up, and then your little powerhouses of your cells called your mitochondria in your brain can utilize them. And different animal and tissue culture studies have actually shown that these neurons, our brain cells, preferentially utilize ketones for fuel, not glucose. So then that's why so many people, for mental clarity purposes, there's different papers that have actually looked at this, that the brain in a fasted state is actually more awake, and there's more cognitive clarity and all that. So I know for some of folks listening now that have never done fasting intentionally, or time restricted feeding, or gone without food, they might think, I couldn't do that. There's no way, right? It just takes practice. It's like, I have a little 7-year-old here, and, she couldn't ride her bike without training wheels, right? I mean, it's impractical to think that a young child could just hop on 2 wheels and just ride. I know there's anomalies and some kids can do that. We need to, crawl before we can walk and run. And so I encourage all of you to stick through this. And the first time you do a fast or intermittent fast or try keto, the first day might kind of not be the best,
Yeah.
right? But it's going to get better over time. Just like the first time you do a bench press or squat, the bar might be like this, right?
Right,
Your arms
yeah.
might shake. But a year later, you're going to be moving through the motions. And so our metabolism adapts to changes just like exercise, like your body adapts to exercise. And we need to keep that in mind. So anyway.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because that's something I get a lot with newer clients. Is one of the things I've realized I have to do, because sometimes when at the beginning you start talking about like fasting or anything of that nature, it's kind of like it's so foreign to them that's hard for them to wrap their mind around it. But if they basically do like a ketogenic diet, get fat adapted, and then I'm able to be like, hey, let's try a 24-hour day fast. Yeah. They realize they still have to they're like, oh my gosh, is this going to be like, is this going to be hard? And I'm like, seriously, like now that like it'll be really easy. You'll be really surprised. And they do it, and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this every week.
Yeah, people feel amazing. They never thought that they could feel that good. And you know what's cool about this, Jason, is it's very liberating mentally, right? Because a lot of us have self-limiting beliefs about what we can do or who we can be in this world. And it's really empowering for people when they go for extended periods of times without food. And so I've actually looked at, fasting's not new, right? If you look at in Islamic and different cultures, I mean, fasting is kind of baked into the framework of various religious and different community things throughout the world. And so I've looked at the Ramadan research, and because we hear all the time women shouldn't fast, oh, this fasting is bad, you need food, all that. And scientists have been, really, kind of have written about where they talk to people, why do you still do this? Because now in 21st century industrial life, we don't need to fast anymore. So, and one of the big reasons why people still do this is they like how they feel afterwards. It's very empowering. It gives people a lot of like self-empowerment, So I think a lot of us are looking for small wins, paying off a credit card, paying off our mortgage, paying off our student loans, whatever, sending our kids to college, all these things. We're looking for these small wins. And you can get a small win in your life by just saying, you know what, look, I'm going to set a goal to not eat today, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to set a goal to go 16 hours with no food. Like most people can't do that.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, that's like, wow, you feel empowered, right?
Oh
and
my
so,
gosh.
I mean, you know this through exercise, and you talk about this a lot, is progress begets more progress, right? So if you're just looking for a small win in your life, and I'm not promoting anorexia or bulimia, right? So we need it, it's a fine line,
That's
right?
true.
You know, we don't want to create dysfunctional eating patterns, but it can be a small win, mental win for a lot of people. And it's surprising how progress just manifests more progress,
It does.
right? And so we've seen a lot of transformations where people, you know, because a lot of people have food issues. You know, they try to mitigate emotional challenges and solve emotional problems by
Yeah.
food, right? When people are lonely, depressed, I've had clients say that, you know, a bad day at the office meant they're hitting up Dairy Queen and getting a big old whatever, just crushing it in the parking
Yeah.
lot, because that's what they have control over. People have control over food. And so what's cool about fasting is it has this transferability into our emotional life, because instead of masking the pain with, say, alcohol or food or porn or whatever, you got to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
So instead of like when you're bored with fasting, you got to work through that.
Yeah.
Because what you know, if I was lonely or whatever, sometimes I would just crush some gluten-free chips, you know, and wouldn't feel so bad about it, or sweet potato chips or whatever. But it's like when you're fasting, you have to deal with those emotions.
Yeah.
You have to recognize and acknowledge them.
Well, this is a
Anyway.
great way, a good place to shift the conversation, I think, because I think this is where sometimes the calories in and calories out model really affects people like psychologically and emotionally. You know, if you watched that, it was a documentary called Fed Up. At
Oh,
all?
I've seen it a while ago. Yeah,
So they were talking a lot about the idea of this whole calories in, calories out, and we're just telling people, well, it's all your fault. You gotta work out more, get more active, and eat less. You know,
Yeah.
and there's these young kids that are struggling. They've been on addictive foods, these high carbohydrate diets. They're eating junk in the morning, eating junk in the afternoon, eating junk later on the day, and then they're just telling them, well, you just got to eat less and be more active, and they do that, and they're not really getting anywhere. It leaves them to feel so helpless and so like overwhelmed that they can't get the results. And so I don't know, I just see this a lot where I think more bad eating habits come from the really eating what we're eating, what we're communicating to people, and things like that. Is there truth to that?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's setting people up for failure, right?
Yeah.
Because then they feel like it's their body's the problem, right? Because look, it's like because it becomes a simple math problem, right? Let's just say this hypothesis, and it's just a hypothesis. Let's just throw that out there. This isn't like, you know, the law of gravity. Like, you can't deny that if I hold this book up and drop it, it's going to drop. Like, there is undisputable. But this energy balance model or hypothesis, it's not like it's confirmed by science or, you know, there is some metabolic ward feeding studies that have looked at this, but there's variables and caveats. And I think we kind of plug in, we talk about obesity as though it's a singular term, right? People are overweight. But there's many different ways that people can become overweight, right? I can give you prednisone. I can give Jason insulin. His body composition will change. I can also overfeed Jason in, you know, just food. His body composition will change. I can give you antibiotics and change your microbiome. You can eat the same foods, your body composition will change. I can have you do the same foods and exercise and just deprive you of sleep. Your body composition will change, right? So the point is, there's no one singular overweight. There's multiple roads, when they say multiple roads to Rome kind of thing. So there's many different ways to go about this. And if you just say it's just the calorie, then, well, what about the sleep? What about the stress management? What about the emotional connection to food? What about the physical activity? What about the hormones? What about the microbiome? What about all these things? So it's not that simple.
Yeah.
And so this calorie in, calorie out model of obesity was really created before the Human Microbiome Project, before we knew about epigenetics. Let me just pause. You know, our genes are kind of like the hardware. So Jason's got his iPhone right here, right? So your hardware is not changing, right? On this phone, your hardware is not changing. Like, our genes are not changing unless we get a somatic mutation. So if you and I go, hang out in Chernobyl or get exposed to gamma rays or X-rays, we can get mutations in our hardware of our genes, but it's not changing the gene expression. But you get a software update, your phone changes, right?
Yeah.
Right? You notice like if you're running an Instagram or Venmo or Facebook and it slows down, sometimes we look to see, do I have the latest version of this? That software. Well, our genes have the equivalent of a software. It's called the epigenome. And this whole field of epigenetics. And so it's crazy, Jason. Like what our grandparents ate or didn't eat is affecting our lives now by way of epigenetics. And so it's crazy. So imagine like the software updates that you get on your phone or your computer, your body has the equivalent of that, and that's called the epigenetics. And so again, this whole energy balance model of obesity was kind of created we didn't know about epigenetics in the 1950s. And so the point is, we can impact the way that our genes are being expressed through the lifestyle choices that we make, through calorie restriction, through various nutrients, micronutrients, sleep, stress, thoughts and beliefs, all that, right?
So it's almost like we're downloading viruses into our genetic code, huh?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to kind of look at it, right? So if you get like a bad program on your PC or it's infected and it's running wrong, I mean, so if we think about it, this is a way, the whole epigenetics and epigenome is a way for our body to adapt to our environment. For example, if you look at like some of these famine studies, the Dutch famine studies, and there's, where there was a famine, say, in various parts of Europe, right? And so the children born during that time period can put on body fat more readily than children that are not born that period. So it sounds like, oh, that's a problem. But the body is in real time, by way of the epigenome, is trying to update the hardware to say, hey, look, there may be a scarcity of food. So whatever food is coming in, let's make sure that we store this. It would increase survival, right? So it's like in one situation, obesity sounds maladaptive because there's food everywhere. But the people that could put on the most body fat, and this is another thing, like looking at this as like a blessing, right? You would survive. Like if the power grid went out because Kim Jong-un in North Korea, did something, the people that have an obesity problem probably would be they would be standing here 50 years. You know what I mean?
They'd have a lot of energy to live off of.
Yeah, man. So it's like, we just need to be and that's another thing. Like if we focus on the negative, I'm fat, I'm overweight, I've always been fat, I always will be fat, my family's fat, you're just gonna manifest that. But if we say, you know what, this is a blessing, man. If something bad happened, like I could survive and use that as momentum and work with that a little bit differently. But the whole field of epigenetics, I think it's really interesting, and it kind of speaks to this idea that we're not broken. Right, and so going back to kind of how you brought in that question is, there's it's not that simple. It's not just the energy. I mean, look, we've worked with so many clients who track every little thing and they still have an issue, and that's where we are in 2019. A lot of people have done the dieting thing for many years, and this is why, if you Ken Berry this morning on his Instagram just shared this. Weight Watchers used to be the thing. This is a diet, and I'm not picking on Weight Watchers. There's many other diets that are programs that are focused on calorie counting, and if you look at the number of shares on Pinterest or following that hashtag, keto has surpassed it like by
oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
So it's like, so look, people have done Weight Watchers. They're not getting the results. This is why other diets, intermittent fasting, keto, is changing. And the reason why I wanted to kind of mention this is because nutritional ketosis and ketones in general affect the epigenome and affect gene signaling.
Yeah. Wow. And so I love that you're talking about all this stuff. One of the things that in Mike's book, he was talking about inflammation, and this really connected a lot of dots for me. But like you were talking about how like microbiome, inflammatory responses in the body, and inflammation is a good thing. But when it's in a chronic state, it shifts the body over more towards like a metabolic state where you're using primarily glucose, which is going to make insulin respond. And so you were talking with Jason Fung on one of your videos, and a lot of people ask, so what's the difference between like calorie restriction and like a ketogenic diet where maybe, or intermittent fasting where you're suppressing your window? In their mind, and in my mind, I kind of was wondering the same thing, like, well, isn't it kind of the same thing? And this book kind of helped me, in that video you did with Jason Fung. Could you kind of explain a little bit
Sure.
about that?
You know, Jason, that's a beautiful question. And I think a lot of people are curious about this. Like, what physiologically is the difference? Like, if I just restrict my calories versus when I intermittent fast, what's the difference? And it has to really kind of do with the hormonal differences between the two different dietary approaches. So if we just talk about intermittent fasting or fasting in general, what makes that biochemically or physiologically different? It has to do with you're driving your glucose and insulin down. And it's not that insulin and glucose are the ultimate enemy, but it just, hear me out here physiologically. So glucose and insulin go down. What happens in that situation is there needs to be a backup fuel system for the brain, right? And for other tissues of the body. So the liver starts to increase production of ketones. And how does it know to do that? Well, there's another hormone derived from the pancreas, not only insulin, but glucagon. Glucagon helps to stimulate the production of ketone synthesis. And so what ketones are is fat molecules put together made by your own liver. A lot of people think like, because a lot of doctors for many years were taught, and this is where a lot of doctors, if you ever get kickback from your healthcare practitioner and they say ketogenic diet is bad, they're taught, that ketosis is a pathological imbalance linked with diabetic ketoacidosis. So they kind of obfuscate or confuse the issue. That's a situation where there's high glucose and ketones together at the same time. That really is kind of unique to type 1 and insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. Your average person, if they're fasting, probably not going to happen, because what's going to happen is you're going to drive your glucose down. Anyway, so when we fast or when we go low carb, glucose, insulin go down, glucagon goes up. We start liberating more fat from our fat cells and converting that for direct energy and also the production of ketones, which is great. What also happens is growth hormone increases. Growth hormone helps actually to spare our lean muscle mass from being degraded to make glucose. So that's really unique. So anyway, the kind of the prerequisite to get the health benefits of fasting is hormonal mediated, which is really unique. And if we can compare and contrast, then that situation where, again, instead of burning glucose for fuel, we're burning fat for fuel. So that's benefit number one. Instead of storing fat, which most people are doing, we're burning fat. So that's kind of, and a lot of scientists talk about this. We're making this so-called metabolic switch. And that's what's key. That's what's different from fasting versus low-calorie dieting. So if we just diet, we can eat Twinkies and junk food and be in a calorie deficit, but we're not stimulating that hormonal switch that's going to cause us to burn more fat for fuel. So we're still kind of burning the sugar. We have high glucose. We don't have the high glucagon because we're still eating food, and maybe it's junk food, but we're in a calorie deficit. So we might just feel tired, lethargic. It's not really going to stimulate that same hormonal cascade that's going to cause the body composition shifts that we're looking for. And so that's kind of the difference. And that's I think it's good for people to test out, what's going to work for them. A lot of bodybuilders and fitness models do get results with this multiple meals, evenly spaced out. But you got to keep in mind they're exercising a lot, doing cardio twice a day, training a lot. Some people are using, hormones and SARMs and anabolic steroids, oral agents, growth hormone, all that. So we're already kind of, messing with the system in a different way. Yeah. And the cool thing about fasting is it's a free way to naturally crank up your growth hormone and change these hormones. So, the physiology is really unique, and not to get too into the weeds, but, proteomics. So if we look at our blood has all these metabolites, and studying those metabolites is the field of metabolomics or proteomics. Yeah. And scientists have looked at what happens when people intermittent fast, and there's a different proteomic and metabolomic signature within the blood. And so when we fast, we're, again, going back to kind of the computer, our genes, we're changing the way the genes are being read or expressed. And that is reflected by these different metabolites. And those metabolites, those different metabolites are changing how our cells behave. Yeah. So that's the thing. It's like getting a software upgrade, whereas just slamming down the calories is not, you're taking kind of the metabolic system that you already have and maybe just turning it down. You're not really changing the way it's behaving. And
so what I hear you saying is that really it's your hormones that are signaling where to partition those calories that are coming in. So there's a different physiological response. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean that's the way that based upon all the research that I've done. I personally don't do the research myself. I just read a lot of the.
Yeah.
There's ample studies now that have been looking at this, and what's cool is more and more research groups are comparing the two methodologies head to head, comparing physiologically what's going on between low calorie diets versus intermittent fasting, and looking at other biomarkers. And so. The hard part I think for a layman looking at this is you get polar opposites and they're both saying that their approach is better, right? But what's cool is research groups are actually looking at this and again, the hard part is if we see a study that shows that, hey, intermittent fasting is no different than low calorie dieting, we need to actually look at the materials and methods of that study. So some intermittent fasting studies actually allow people to have up to 600 grams of calories per day. You're like, well, is that really fasting if they're having that many calories and all that? So again, we're not really sometimes comparing apples to apples.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that people are just aware that study methodology sometimes is different in these different studies. So that's why we hear different perspectives. And that's a crazy thing about this is the headlines, the sensational headlines in New York Times or Wall Street Journal, they don't tell you those little nitty gritty.
That's so true. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking at the beginning of context and everything. And I think that's the thing is where people are leaving out context. Like let's say me being a very metabolically flexible person, I can probably switch back into energy metabolisms different ways if I have pretty good digestion and my hormonal balance and so forth.
Yeah.
But somebody that maybe has dieted for years and years, up and down, they have a lot of inflammation, they're insulin resistant, things of that nature, you're probably going to see these are where the challenge ones that I felt like the people that I was working with, that they seem to be doing the quote unquote right things. They're working out more. They're going to the gym like 6 to 8 times a week. And then they're cutting their calories, eating lots of solids, and don't seem to be getting anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what you're doing, and you're telling your body, you're sending the scarcity message, right? So it's Jay Tita has talked about this a lot, a friend of mine. He has an acronym, I can't remember, but so eating a lot of salads and celery. So you're telling the system, hey, there's not a lot of fuel coming in, plus you're adding the demand of over-exercise. And that's just telling the body, hold on more, because it's like you're setting that scarcity signal. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of people, it's funny, I mean, some of the leanest people I know, they eat a ton of food, Maybe it's not all spread out throughout the day, but like one meal, my wife, for example, she runs at like 8 to 11% body fat sometimes. She's trying to put on a little bit more now, but man, she eats a ton.
Yeah.
You should see it like when she actually sits down and eats. So, yeah, it's common thinking, right? The less you eat, the more you exercise, the more fat you're going to lose. And it's like maybe in a short term, maybe for an event, for a bodybuilding competition, right? Maybe you can get kind of tight, but that's going to cause a rebound, like you're saying. And then a lot of people have, some people have talked about, like a metabolic dysfunction or broken metabolism. Yeah. There's all that. But it's good to have these breaks, diet breaks. We were talking yesterday how studies have actually looked at people that do strict low-calorie diet for 12 weeks versus another arm of the study where they do a low-calorie diet, and then 3 weeks into it, they do a 1 week break. And then they looked at the outcomes after 10, 12 weeks, and the people that had the diet breaks did better. And so I just encourage people, like, whatever you're doing, if it's keto, fasting, if it's low-calorie dieting, whatever it is, throw in a break in there. And it doesn't necessarily mean have Pizza Hut and Jack in the Box, right? But maybe have some sweet potatoes if you're a keto person. Yeah. Maybe have some, organic butternut squash, whatever it is. But just to have vary the inputs, right? Yeah. It's like we were talking about with exercise. You never go do the same thing every single time you go to the gym, right? You're telling the muscle to hey, you gotta be good at this. You gotta be good at explosiveness, hypertrophy. Like you're sending different you're placing different demands on the muscle tissue. And I think if we place different demands on our metabolic system, it's gonna adapt in a similar way.
That's true. I know experientially for me, I used to do the typical bodybuilding 8 times a day, lots of lean chicken and rice and sweet potatoes and stuff. And it really did work for me. I did really well. I stayed lean. Yeah. But I was ravenously starving all the time. I tended to be hangry all the time. I had one guy say it's like you're redlining, you know exactly when you're redlining, you just want to kind of punch a wall or something.
Yeah.
So experientially, I had that. But one thing I love about the ketogenic diet is it's measurable, and you can track your ketones, your blood glucose. And when I switched, I was able to maintain the same lean body mass. I feel better. I'm just calmer. I don't have that redlining feeling. And so, the bodybuilding industry for a while would make you think like, well, if you didn't eat protein every 3 hours or something like that, you were going to waste away. And so some of these just things I think are things that we hold on to just for the sake of confirmation bias, like you were talking about.
Totally. And we get into these like, this book, I can't remember this, iGen talks about how we get into these like confirmation loops, right? So let's say we're in the bodybuilding space, right? Or let's say we're in the keto space. A lot of people just follow keto pages, follow keto accounts, and I'm not picking on keto, I'm just giving you a little perspective. Or if you're a strength and conditioning guy, fitness guy, you follow those hashtags. You're constantly consuming that, so that's all you know. And just because you said this yesterday, just because something's common doesn't mean it's normal or right or ideal. And we need to think about, this idea of like, where did this idea come from to eat every 2 to 3 hours and have protein shakes and all that? Well, it came from bodybuilding magazines. And you're like, I don't think it's a conspiracy, but where do bodybuilding magazines get the funding to make their magazines? From advertisements from protein companies, right? Yeah, we need to just kind of look at where the information is coming from.
Yeah.
And one example, I share this all the time because my wife eats 1 meal a day. A lot of lean muscle mass, not a lot of body fat. Feeding studies have actually shown, because if we think, well, if you get older, you're more catabolic, you need to eat multiple meals a day. An eloquent feeding study in 2004, 2005, is close to 15 years ago now, was published, showing that older women were able to actually stimulate muscle protein synthesis more eating 1 meal a day versus other women who are eating 3 times a day. So the body's smart, right? We have years of, whether you want to believe in intelligent design, evolution, pick your path, I don't really care. The human body is so sophisticated and smart. And so this idea that we can't, stimulate muscle protein synthesis without eating all the time is just, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right?
So to wrap, why don't we wrap up with this? But so with all that said, all the stuff we were just talking about, calories in and calories out, do you see like how? What I see a lot of times is sometimes it can lead this mindset can lead to a lot of emotional and just psychological insecurities and things like that, or just frustration of when they're not getting results. They do this over and over again, and then they lose belief in themselves that they can't even like really accomplish it. My sister said it best. She's like, I say this all the time, and she told me when she first started training with me, she said, Jason, this is like a mountain I just can't see past. It's something she struggled with her entire life. And some of it, I definitely believe, is stuff that we can control. But some of these things, I believe, have set people up for failure. Yeah. And then it leads to this emotional breakdown, or maybe a bad relationship with food, because all you're looking at is food as just calories, and they're not taking in context of maybe what types of calories that they're eating in some of these feeding window periods, and like the context of how these hormones, like hormonal balance and stuff. Yeah,
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, there's a great book, Carol Dweck, Mindset, right? Okay. And so if we tell ourselves, I'm pretty, or I'm smart, or whatever, then if something comes up in life and that is in conflict with that, then we get really depressed or really disappointed, right? And so she talks about having this praising effort for our children, right? So parents would resonate this with, and I'll tie it back in. So if instead of saying you did good, or you played good, or you're the best athlete, or whatever, if we praise effort, right? So if we kind of focus on what we can control, then the outcomes are a lot better. So children, it's a great book, for all parents.
Yeah,
and so
I've that one up.
Yeah, I've worked on it with my daughter, because I used to say, you're a good reader. And I would say, Nez, I love that you're trying hard.
Yeah.
Because if something comes up where she thinks she's not good, then it's going to like throw out her whole world, right? So instead, if we just focus on other things like, wow, I did good today, I had high ketones, or I did good today, I was able to constrict my feeding window, right? If we focus on other things, but it's almost like if we focus on just calories, it's that closed mindset. And then if it's not working, then we think we're the problem, like
Yeah.
you're saying. And that only creates more dysfunction. And then so people are like, well, screw it. I'm just going to be fat no matter what. Like,
Yeah.
I've tried this, it doesn't work. I'm broken. And then people start, guess what? They start to believe that.
Yeah.
Right? The thoughts, I mean, if you don't believe in thoughts, just tell yourself negative stuff and negative things will happen in your life.
I've seen it over and over again. We were talking
Yeah.
about it yesterday. It's like those negative people just feed on more negativity. And like it's those people, maybe they're watching the news too much. And then they just become haters, and they're really, really just negative people.
Yeah, man. So our thoughts are really important. And so, yeah, we want to set people up for success. So they have these small wins, you know, and start to believe that they're malleable, they're changeable. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, Jason's not the same person today as he was 10 years ago, right? Mike is so different today from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Everyone listening, you know, same thing. And so we always want to be improving.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think just focusing on that energy balance pie it kind of narrows your vision a little bit.
Yeah.
And so if things don't work, then what? Then you blame yourself, like you said.
Yeah.
That's just not a good.
Do you think it almost seems like it works like in a cycle too? Because even with they kind of put a lot of emphasis on the weight on the scale.
Yeah.
And so they just look at that number, and then they might like, okay, well, they don't like the weight. So then they start trying to cut their calories again even more. And it's this vicious cycle. And then, yeah, it's just this loop of just failure and failure. And the more failure that you have, the more less confidence that you have in yourself.
Totally.
So,
Yeah, then that affects everything. Then you're like, well, I'm broken anyway. Why not just hit up Pizza Hut or Domino's
Yeah.
tonight? You know, drink some more beer or whatever. Can't fix it.
diet starts Monday.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So it's, you know, intermittent fasting and all that. It's not really magic, right? It's just a tool. You know, all these things are different tools. I encourage people to use the tool that works for them.
Yeah.
But, you know, kind of in closing, the tool of, you know, balancing calories hasn't really been that successful. And the best published example of that is the Biggest Loser study, where calories was the focus. Increasing energy expenditure by way of overexercising was a focus. That didn't work, right? So it's like we got to look at the food quality. We have to look at our mindset, the thoughts, and we really have the belief that we are malleable, we are changeable. Like human beings, I mean, we're constantly growing. I mean, and look at people that are elderly, that are reading, versus the people that don't read, that watch the news. A totally different mindset, right? I mean, in terms of like their verbal, you know, ability to articulate things and follow conversations. So old dogs can learn new tricks, and
Ain't that the truth?
our metabolism can change, and you know, people aren't broken, you know. And so I think the best hope for some people that have the broken metabolism, so to speak, that have done the crash diets, is to piggyback off the signaling properties of the ketones, because they do affect our metabolism in a different way epigenetically, right? So it's tinkering, it's like causing that software update with the phone that we talked about in our genes. So I don't know what the hope is or how long people need to fast or whatever, but I just think, and you talked about this a lot, is having the mindset and the belief that, man, this is, I can change this. Like it's not fixed.
Yeah, totally, man. Well, man, hey, this conversation has been fabulous. Like, I hope we can do this again
Heck
for sure. If people want to find you on social media, they want to know more about you, definitely follow his channel. It's High Intensity Health. Like I said, I'm watching it all the time. Anytime there's a notification that comes up on my phone, I'm like,
First to
I gotta watch
comment.
it. Yeah, I try to be the first to comment. Like, darn, somebody else got to me. But no, I've really referred you to a lot of the people that in MySpace and stuff. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah,
but
man.
any other type of places that people can find you or?
Sure. Well, yeah, really honored that you all are still here watching. Yeah, if you like this, just hit that like button. I'll be following this video as well. My YouTube channel is High Intensity Health, and then I'm also on Instagram as well. So I'd like to share like a mix of like funny memes, and a little science on Instagram, metabolic_Mike. So yeah, if you all listen to this, if you enjoyed it, send me a direct message and we'll connect there. So
I'll put the links in the show notes. But one thing I want to end with, and it's something Mike always does on every one of his shows, but he always asks people if there was one botanical herb supplement that you couldn't go without, if you're stranded on an island, vitamin D is out the window, and omega-3s, what would it be?
Oh man, that's well said. Shoot, you know, I mean, that's the funny thing is it changes over time. But God, I love magnesium, and it's kind of a boring one, but magnesium is a mineral, but it's involved in like it's a cofactor for north of 300 different enzymatic reactions. And it's really only found in appreciable amounts in things like dark chocolate. So it's kind of hard to get from our diet, but we deplete it through exercise, through fasting even. Like you excrete more minerals when you fast. So I love magnesium and salt. And so those are some things that I think can really, I try to pick supplements for people in different botanicals and stuff that have a high, kind of like the shotgun approach. Like instead of just, like there's like a sniper rifle, right? Where you just hit one little target, but if you can affect multiple systems. So I think electrolytes are super important. So I would say magnesium. Nice. I love taurine. I'm kind of cheating here with multiple of them, but just keeping it basic, man.
Yeah. Okay, one last question that you always ask people. If you were to run into like the President of the United States, you're on the elevator, or some influential person that helps to change policy for the healthcare policy, what advice might you give to that person?
Oh man, I love this, Jason. Yeah, this is really good. I would say, especially if it's someone that's like a parliament member for representing like a Western civilized, like a European or North American country, I would say, we're hemorrhaging, we're bleeding, right? I mean, if you look at the amount of money that we're spending on healthcare, it's just unsustainable. And if we look at the prevalence of previously only adult onset diseases, like hypertension, like elevated lipids, like type 2 diabetes, we're seeing this at earlier in children now. Like, you see this probably, dropping your kids off at school. I didn't remember
I say that all the time.
Kids having a double chin and bellies, right? And so if we look at how unhealthy the adults now are, think about when our children are adults, how unhealthy, not only just unhealthy, but unproductive.
Yeah.
And how expensive it is going to be to medically manage that. We're missing the boat, right? We're not allocating resources, energy, time into fixing the root cause of the problem. By trying to medicate things on the back end with drugs, procedures, and all that. It doesn't work. It's not sustainable. And so, we focus, on, and certain politicians talk about, make America great again, do these things. I resonate with that. But man, how can a country be great at anything if the people are sick? And so I think we're spending the money in the wrong places, and we're not emphasizing, we're giving big food companies a free ride, right? Like they should be, we're looking at people are proposing taxing meat. Yet fast food companies and liquid sodas, and these aren't taxed at a higher rate. They should be. And so, look, everyone, we talked about this yesterday, people need to be ready for change, right? Like not everyone, you taught your aunt, your uncle, your grandparents about making dietary changes. They don't really listen until they're ready. So I don't know how we're going to make people ready. Is it by taxing them more? Is it fiscally motivated or mediated? Or is it something else? I don't know how we influence people that way, but it needs to start from both the bottom and the top, right? Because if it's just from the bottom, like people like you and I talking about it, people turn on the news, they see a drug commercial, they see fast food, but they think there's no problem. And it is
the inputs there are way overwhelming than the inputs that they're getting, from us or whatever.
Yeah, it's just so ubiquitous, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, parents need to just wake up, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't believe. I mean, you and I as fathers, our children are like our number one asset. Like we want to spend time with them, care about them. Yeah, a lot of parents feed their kids crap, and it's like that's your legacy. That's your genes, like being passed on, like garbage in, garbage out, man.
You don't want to spread viruses down to your kids.
Yeah, I know, man. Yeah. So anyway, that wasn't 30 seconds. I went way over.
Well, man, no, hey, I love this, and that's what they call a Mike Mutzel mic drop. Boom.
Hopefully. Jason, really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah,
man.
too. I can't wait to do this again, guys. Thank you so much. If you want to subscribe to our channel, Final Start Fitness, please do so. If you don't, that's okay too. But God bless you guys. Peace.
Thanks for tuning in, guys.
See you. That was great.
Nice,
Thanks,
man. You crushed that. Bam.